Well, welcome everyone to today's great talk. The title of today's session is The Long and Winding Road of a UN Staff from Nuremberg in 1946 to Geneva 2020 and beyond. Our very special guest today is Yves Beigbeder, who is a distinguished and cherished member of our association, Greycells. He is a giant with an amazing life and a career path as international civil servant. We are extremely honored to have him as a member of our association and to benefit from his talent, generosity, and friendship. When I met the first time Yves and learned that he had participated at the Nuremberg process, I thought he is a lucky guy. Nevertheless, through the years, I am convinced that this is the opposite. It was the Nuremberg process who was lucky to have a young Frenchman, as Yves, who would be instrumental in reminding future generations the learnings of that process. In 1944, Yves Beigbeder was only 20 years old, and he joined the French resistance, Forces françaises de l'intérieur dit maquis. 2 years later, as a recently graduate in law, Yves Beigveder was the assistant of the French judge Henri Donnedieu de Vabres at the International Tribunal in Nuremberg in 1946. Further to postgraduate studies in the United States, he joined the United Nations at the FAO in Rome, then at the WHO in Brazzaville, Copenhague, Alexandrie and New Delhi. He holds a PhD in public law, and he lectured on international organizations, international civil service, and international criminal courts at the universities of Paris, Geneva, St. Louis, Boston, and Vancouver. He wrote more than 30 books and many articles in English and French on all these topics. He lives now in France and continues to write and to analyze international events. He participates regularly at the commemoration of the Nuremberg process in Germany. We are extremely honored to have him as a member of our association and to have him today. Manuela Tortora, our Vice President, will moderate the session. Just before I give the floor to you, Manuela, I need just to let you know, and all those who are listening and watching this, that we have prepared a diaporama with some historical and less historical pictures and copies of his books from Yves Beigveder. We Googled him, and he was kind enough to share a number of photos and books with us. So while he talks, we're going to share briefly this diaporama so that we can get an additional information of the contribution to Yves to the memory of the learnings of Nuremberg and beyond. So Manuela, Yves, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. As usual, I would like to kindly ask everybody except Yves, of course, to close your mics so that we can improve the audio of the group, the audio for everybody. And of course, also as usual, any comment or question that you have, please write it down in a short sentence or with keywords in the column of the chat, and I can then try to manage as best as I can the conversation with Yves. So I will do the role of the transmission belt between you, your questions, your comments, and Yves. And here we have the diaporama. Please, for the questions, since we have the diaporama on the screen, please wait until Yves finishes his own presentation, introduction, whatever he would like to say as general comments before starting talking to you, because otherwise it's difficult for me to look at the diaporama and the questions at the same time on the same screen. So the floor is yours, Yves. And again, thank you so much for sharing this experience, this modern technology also with us. You have the floor, Yves.
Well, I'm very grateful to you, to Greycells, for organizing this impressive meeting. But I'd like also to mention that I'm also a member of the Association of WHO Retirees and of AFIX, another group. but I must say that Greycells has been wonderful. So here I am in Nuremberg with an American uniform, which was provided by the Americans. Nuremberg was, of course, held in the American zone, occupied zone of Germany. This is one of my books. I've written about 5 books on international criminal tribunals. This is the courtroom with the judges are on the left, and at the extreme right are the French judges, Henri de Vabres and Robert Falco. The chair was Sir Lawrence, is in the middle, and then you've got assistants below, and people admitted to the court. And the German accused are just on the other side. So the judges are here, and on the right, you will see them later on, are the 21 German dignitaries. Now, one question may be why was I in Nuremberg? I had just finished my law degree, licence en droit, and I received a call from the judge, Donnedieu's wife, saying, "Your uncle would like you to go to Nuremberg." And there it was. I went there for 5 months to help the French judges, Henri de Vabres and Robert Falco, to write summaries of the debates on the 7 German indicted. So I had a small role, and then in August 1946, I went to the United States for a scholarship. Theatre public theatre wrote a number of various subjects. There they are. On the left, you have Goering, then Rudolf Hess, the one who went in 1941 to Scotland to make peace with the UK, but without Hitler's permission. So that was, of course, a total failure. Then you can see the generals, Jodels and Jodels, and then they were always escorted by GIs with white helmets. And Schacht is, I think, over the economist. Well, among those in the dock, you had Hans Frank, the so-called butcher of Poland, who was responsible for killing millions of Jews and dissidents in Poland. And strangely, at one stage during the sessions, he said that he had converted to the Catholic religion and felt a deep feeling of guilt. So that was quite extraordinary, because none of the other accused confessed anything like guilt. They were all, at the beginning of the trial, they were asked, what do you plead? and you plead guilty or not guilty, and they all said not guilty, not guilty. In spite of all the evidence was brought during the trial. That's another part of my writing. It was about management problems in UN organizations. Because my first book was on trade unionism in UN organizations, so staff associations, etc. That was the subject of my thesis for the doctorate in public law. Oh yes, it was the 70th anniversary of the beginning of the Nuremberg trial, which was a memorial session held in Nuremberg itself, in the courtroom of the trial, and I was astonished by the fact that this was organized by the city of Nuremberg, and the city of Nuremberg, which was the place of big meetings of Hitler, and the place where the Nuremberg anti-Jewish were signed. Nuremberg had become a city of human rights, where they were holding many meetings on human rights. There's a street of human rights and a house of human rights. When I saw that, I thought that that would be a good suggestion to make to the French city Vichy. So I wrote to the Vichy mayor, told him about this conversion of Nuremberg, and suggesting that they did the same in Vichy, but I never had a reply. Unfortunately, I suppose there were too many people in Vichy who didn't want to touch the subject. So that was a very interesting memorial with Philip Sands, the author, and two other survivors, American nationality. Unfortunately, one of them has died since. And in public, we had a public session with many questions from the audience. And then I was also called to a group of teachers, German teachers, that was separate from the memorial itself. But that was very interesting and fascinating to find again this place where the trial was held. In this meeting, the grandson of Hans Frank was there, who hated his son, hated his father. Now, what?
This, let me help you. The previous picture was at the University of St. Gallen. Remember, we were there?
Oh, I see.
With, yes,
oh, okay.
Exactly, here. Yeah. It was something like 2-3 years ago.
I'm sorry?
It was something like 2-3 years ago. I think I took that picture myself, if I remember correctly. Alejandro was also there, I think.
Yes.
It was one of the sessions we had at the St. Gallen University.
Yes, again, that was thanks to the initiative of Greycells that I and others could go to St. Gallen University and speak to young students about our experiences. That was very rewarding. Thank you. I would welcome any questions, if any.
They will come, don't worry. They will come very soon. I cannot see for the time being the chat column, but
yes, I was also very interested in the NGOs and wrote in French and in English on their international role. Ah, well.
This is the family picture at the University of St. Gallo, one of them.
You're becoming younger and younger with the young students and enthusiasm. Very nice. I enjoyed that very much. I wrote several books on the WHO, and this one was given. I was asked to complete this book, which had been half done by three people at the Graduate Institute of Higher International Studies. So I started completing this book in English, and then I did it in French, and so that was the first time, one of my first books, updating the information on WHO. And it became also a cherished in French. Well, there's no comments. Oh yes, I wrote a number of books on sort of thinking or talking or writing about reform. As you know, whenever a UN organization is being criticized, like the UN, like WHO, UNESCO, and others, they always talk about it must be reformed, but we don't know what that means. Reformed what? Its objectives, or reformed in its own constitution? It's a recurring question, and there are every few years some study groups or expert groups look at the organization's structure, organization's mandate, organization's performance, make recommendations which are then applied. But it never satisfies all the organization's customers, in other words, the member countries, or public opinion.
Oh, there we had a meeting, a very nice lunch.
Well, that was a time for study and relaxation.
Yes, indeed.
At Nina, I suppose.
Nina, exactly.
At a restaurant in Geneva. Yes, I wrote first on UNICEF, then on HCR. I always wrote on my own without asking anybody's permission. I never asked WHO, for instance, for permission to write about it, because they wouldn't have allowed me to do so. I never asked the HCR either. I went to see them to try to get some information, which was very difficult to obtain. UNICEF also. All these organizations have a fear of being exposed publicly and being criticized, so they don't encourage the people like me who are independent writers. But then it goes. So the main problem for me was to get permission from publishers, not from the organizations. And once that was done, I was very grateful. Yes, there's a CEST, these short books.
This was one of the first intergenerational dialogue commemorating the 10th anniversary of Greycells at the Palais des Nations. You were the star there.
Yes, I enjoyed that meeting. This is one of several books on the same subjects, but the subjects were evolving, mainly about, always started, of course, with Nuremberg, but then also the Tokyo Tribunal, which judged Japanese defendants, which was not entirely a success. And then that was 46, 48. Nuremberg was 45, 46. And then nothing happened because of the Cold War until the 90s, when temporary tribunals were created for ex-Yugoslavia and for Rwanda by the UN Security Council. This raises in many people's mind whether it was appropriate that the Security Council created those tribunals. The Nuremberg Tribunal was created by the international treaty, and other tribunals later were also organized by international treaties. But anyway, the advantage was that the judges and prosecutors of those first two tribunals, ex-Yugoslavia and Rwanda, could have the support of the UN and the UN Security Council, as well as the UN financing and legal support. Then later on, there were other tribunals. The tribunal for Sierra Leone was the main achievement, besides condemning those who led those horrible wars in Africa. Charles Taylor was judged by this tribunal of Sierra Leone in Geneva, and he was sort of, although he was the president of Liberia, but he supported the rebels in Sierra Leone, and he was rightly condemned to 50 years jail. One of the reasons for having international tribunals is that those criminals would not be judged in their own country for many reasons. So that's where international tribunals may come in and be somewhat above the internal political problems of the country. Well, I'm getting a bit older now, but not quite, as you see.
Yes, we got all of this from Google. You appear in many, many pages.
That's again, well, that's the major reason, rationale for international tribunals when national courts cannot judge is trying to get important political or military leaders responsible for crimes to be judged and punished. That was the case for Nuremberg. Of course, one of the trouble with Nuremberg and Tokyo is that the victors judged the defeated, which is one of the accusations, or criticisms rather, of those tribunals. The later tribunals were really international, with varied membership of judges and prosecutors. That's again Nuremberg 50 years later.
Okay.
The WHO was a rich source of writing for me. UNICEF, which of course is well known to everybody. Yes, that's one of the 5 books on these international criminal tribunals were all temporary. Some didn't get anywhere. There's a tribunal for Lebanon, which is quite hopeless because the guilty people are Syrians, and Syria will not cooperate, obviously. This is in the courtroom of Nuremberg. I was not supposed to sit and watch debates. My job was in the background in the small office, working on the writing up summaries of debates. But I had access when something interesting was being told.
The first one comes from Geshe, and it concerns your interest in human rights that apparently started at the Nuremberg trial, since you were so young at that time, you were only 22. But how this interest on human rights developed later, and then what drove you to get involved in the human resources management in the UN?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Okay.
That's the question?
Your interest in human rights apparently started at the Nuremberg trial, right? But then it evolved, it was confirmed, and then it evolved, including also the management of human resources at the UN, which is just one aspect of it. So there was an evolution in your interest in human rights. Is that correct?
Well, originally I started with law, licence en droit. Then in the US, I studied psychology and education. And then when I came back to France after 2 years in the USA at the University of Bloomington, Indiana, I worked as a psychological assistant, giving tests and studying and working from Paris in various business firms in France, together with management experts to try to improve their performance. Actually, after a few years in France, I saw an advertisement in the paper for a job in FAO, and I applied. And I was interviewed in Paris by 2 Americans who were impressed because I had an American degree, MSc. So that was fantastic opening. And they asked me to do some testing for them in Rome. So I had to organize, I was recruited for 1 year in FAO, and I was asked to organize tests for young statistical graduates to be recruited by FAO. So that's what these examinations were organized in Geneva, in Paris, in London, and I had to run these, and that was successful. And then after I had done this type of job, FAO at the time was a very, very American. The director general was American, the chief budget was American. Only the legal officer was French, but they were, because they were coming from Washington. FAO had just been transferred from Washington to Rome, and they were very heavily influenced by the US, in particular during the McCarthy thing, witch hunt. There was a big case in FAO, McIntyre, and we were all sort of, we knew exactly what was going on because it was discovered that by the registry of FAO, that the Director General of FAO got an instruction from the US to sack McIntyre because he was not loyal to the US. And it went to the case went to the ILO Administrative Tribunal, which FAO had just joined, and we were all cheering in the background virtually. But he won his case. But he was never taken back in FAO, and eventually got back to the States, I suppose. But that was very interesting historically in the international administrations, because there were many such cases where the US influenced and interfered with the management of the organizations to get people fired or otherwise. And of course, the US is not the only country which tries to influence international secretariats, but the US has the power and the money. Later on, such maneuvers were mostly done by communist countries from the USSR or Eastern Europe, and then later on China, who decided who should be employed in the UN organization, and asked those. For instance, we had a number of Russian employees in WHO in Geneva. Some of them were absolutely hopeless. They had no clue of what was going on, but they spent most of their time making photocopies of what they found in WHO. There was really nothing secret in WHO, but and they had to report to the Soviet delegation in Geneva every week, and their lodging was paid by the Soviets. So there was very strong interference of the communist countries. Again, it's not the only country trying to influence, but those were particularly tragic sometimes. During my time in the WHO in Geneva, one chap, a Russian chap who was working in public information, escaped and went sought asylum in the UK. He was probably punished for that later on, because all these delegated or sent to UN organizations, usually their families were left behind, so that was a way of keeping them in line. When you say that UN organizations are not political, well, they are politicized necessarily because they are made up of states, and some states are democratic, but not many of them.
Yves, I think one way to define you is to call you with the French expression that you are an esprit libre. And Frédéric, in this regard, is asking if you had some sort of negative repercussions when publishing so many books, and all of them are very analytical, some of them more critical than others, but certainly, as you said, were published without the authorization of the institution, precisely to keep your freedom, while at the same time you were a UN staff, so well before your retirement. So where repercussions for your careers because
No,
of
that's
being
a good
business
question.
people?
I don't think my books were read because nothing happened. But I got a reaction in one of my articles, where I said that the ILO would leave the common system, which was an exaggeration. But I got a letter from the director of personnel of the ILO saying how scandalous, that it's not true. As an international civil servant or former one, you have no right to write. But anyway, that my director of administration, Mr. Monteanu, who was a fine person, called me, and anyway, in a friendly way, but he told me this is what happened. I said, well, you have to write things which are of interest, or which I wrote 1 or 2 articles about the Eastern European countries' way of dealing with their staff member, but I wrote under a pseudo. I took the pseudo of one of my children, Thomas Bayard. He doesn't know that he wrote those articles.
Oh, he doesn't know. Okay. Good. And in the meanwhile, while I come to another question from Federica, in the meanwhile, I have a very interesting question from Enrique, which is a big one, an ambitious one. Would, in your opinion, one day the UN really govern the world? And do you think, is it too utopic to think about one world where all people will be citizens of the world? Will we get there sometime?
I didn't quite catch that, please.
A world governed by the UN. Do you think we can imagine that? Is not too utopic?
That we need another war to reform the UN or to create another UN? No, that's
Maybe
the question.
you want to put that in the category of reform. So yeah, that could be a big reform. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't wish we had another war. The last one was bad enough, but the next one would be even more terrifying. But it's true that you need very special circumstances to create international organizations. The League of Nations was created after the First World War, as well as the ILO. And as you know, the whole UN system was created after the Second World War, when people or countries were hoping to establish peace and security and perhaps human rights, although human rights were never a primary concern for them. But you needed to shake, to have also statesmen of such stature as Roosevelt or Churchill to be able to build up international organizations and try to maintain peace.
Yeah, in this regard, talking about wars that create a new world order, in a previous great talk, I think it was with Mr. Michael Muller, the Director General of the Office of the UN in Geneva, we asked, or we discussed, if the pandemic, the current pandemic, has the same impact in terms of a shock, a strong enough shock, similar to the world, to shake the international, the multilateral order in such a way that it delivers really big reform. Do you think the pandemic has that sort of potential impact, like a war?
I don't think so. I see that the pandemic has created a lot of criticisms of WHO, and some justified and some not. But I don't see any major innovation at the international level. At a national level, certainly that shakes people, and it seems to be. There have been recent local elections in France, and so suddenly the ecologists have won, and that perhaps is linked with the fear of the virus and the shake that at a national level, I'm seeing a number of countries, it may be innovations by international level. I don't see. And if you say, okay, the ritual is no good, suppress it, well, next one will be the same. I mean, I don't think there'll be any, unless you give means, financial means, and powers to international organizations to not to be totally subject to the whims of member states, you won't get much of a change. This is one of the criticisms of the US versus the WHO. Why didn't you tell China to behave? But the WHO cannot tell China to behave. They can only sort of ask to investigate things and make recommendations. But the WHO and the UN have no powers at all on their own. This is what why I'm in admiration on the European Union and the Council of Europe at the European level. Of course, this is made up mainly of democratic countries, and they managed to have a European Court of Human Rights and maintain peace, security, and trade. It's very difficult to do it at the global level with 190 countries. Most of them are not democracies and have different aims. Still, the global organizations are needed for consultation and cooperation, but it's difficult to see how they could get the Security Council or the General Assembly to act in a forceful way.
Yves, you just mentioned in the recent elections, municipal elections in France, the pressure of the green movements, green parties, ecologists. These are the representation of civil society, and certainly within the civil society, a very powerful trend and mobilization that is taking shape at the national level. And as you rightly mentioned, we do not see a similar kind of pressures at the global level, at the multilateral level in general. Federica is asking in this regard if within the UN system, the role of the civil society is strong enough or could be more supported to develop further its own role within the UN system.
Yes, I quite agree. I think that's the only way you can get some change through civil society and pressures from activists. Even in France, the ecologists seem to have won in many places, but our president Macron is no ecologist, and he pretends to be, but is not. Nothing has been done. So you have to push, people have to push all the time and check and control that the leaders do what they should do. And unfortunately, when a country like the US withdraws from the Paris Agreement, that doesn't help. You should really use those international meetings and conventions to make progress and forward, to look forward.
Yves, as I mentioned before, we have also some Chinese students here on board, and precisely there is a question from China. how do you think about relativism in culture, in development, etc., in the international governance? I noticed that many UN missions, especially like human rights, conflict settlement, and a lot of problems in the ground because of the different understanding or misunderstanding between the ground, I mean the reality of the ground certainly, and international standards. Is there an alternative solution by the UN to balance the practice conflicts? So if I am interpreting right, the question is about the focus of the UN on human rights and dispute settlements, which is part of its mandate, and the reality of at the ground level that, according to the question, to our Chinese colleague, is not always the good focus to have. I don't know if you have some thinking on that, and more generally about the Chinese role in the international system right now.
Well, as we know, the Human Rights Department has no power except that of getting experts or delegated to make missions. Apparently, quite a number of missions, human rights have been sent every year by the Council of Human Rights. But of course, the Council of Human Rights is made up of some members of authoritarian or totalitarian countries, and is not keen to have their own sins revealed or looked into. It is very, very difficult. I think there I admire the work of Oxfam or Human Rights Watch and other NGOs who do a wonderful job. I mean, the Human Rights Secretariat of the UN could not work without the human rights studies and reports. But it's only sort of a scratch on the skin of, authoritarian leaders and countries which still do torture and don't respect the rights of their citizens. It's always played, I mean, it's good that now the UN peacekeeping forces have a human rights element. I think that's very, very important. But it's very slow and difficult to process. And you need people like some of them who've lost their lives, and a former High Commissioner for Human Rights, I forget his name now, the Prince, was apparently very outspoken. I think that you also need the UN people to be more outspoken about what they feel, what they see. Of course, doing so, they'll probably be dismissed quickly, but still, it might make a little bit of impression.
And about
easy for me to say because I'm retired, but I would encourage young people to, courageous people, idealistic people to speak up.
Regarding China, the role of China at the international level, I mean, as compared to the time when you were a UN staff, I mean, we are seeing an evolution in the recent 10 years within the UN system of the role of China that is really changing a lot of thinking. How do you see the role of China within the UN system?
Well, I'm no specialist, but I think it's very good that China is involved in the UN organizations. We had a Chinese Director General of the WHO before the current one, and China has a Chinese national as Director General of FAO, and I think ICAO also. So I think it's good that China not only influences those organizations, but also realizes what they do and what they can do to have a more open, multilateral view of life and of work. I know that Greycells is doing quite a bit of work on that, and I think it's very good. Keep up the contacts and get students to come and talk and see what. I don't want to be too negative, but I have some doubts about the evolution of China, seeing what happens in Hong Kong, etc. So I don't know if you want to go on that line, but it's a delicate ground.
Yes, indeed. As I said, we are in touch as Greycells with a group of Chinese students of master level. Many of them, the majority of them, having are resident. I mean, are studying in Europe or in the US. And now we are continuing our talks with them, and precisely the next one will be on Thursday on the issue of inequalities. But each time that we discuss with them, we ourselves, I mean, we Greycells, European-minded center people, we realize that there is a gap. There is indeed a huge gap in the basic concepts, not only on human rights, also on multilateralism, for instance, in general. Our conceptions are indeed different, but it's always extremely constructive and interesting to have a dialogue with them. They are very, very disciplined, curious, intelligent, smart, young people. So we learn a lot, and I hope they also learn a lot on their side. But certainly we enjoy that bridge with the Chinese students, even if, as you say, it's sometimes a delicate, sensitive matter. I have a general question for you, Yves. Imagine that you can go back in time and you can reverse or change some of your main decisions, your professional career or in your life altogether. What would be the changes that you would like to introduce in what you decided?
Well, of course, I cannot go back and repair anything. I could have become a psychologist, for instance, but I sort of left it aside because I started studies in that field. I was very interested, especially clinical psychology. I did a bit of that in the States and a bit in France. But then eventually I become an administrator. And when at a later time in WHO, when I got a bit bored, I wondered what I could do to improve myself. I could not do anything on the psychological side because I asked Piaget if I could work with him, and he said, no, you have to work full time. So then I turned back to law and registered with the Grenoble University to do a doctorate in law, which I did over 5 years. So that was a key thing when I started with FAO. I did a bit of psychology with testing, but then eventually it was all administrative work. Administrative and legal work. So the legal side was important and interesting. Otherwise, I don't know what else. Perhaps if I knew, I could have applied to become a diplomat or something like that, but I didn't do the appropriate studies and I didn't know what I wanted to do. Originally, after my studies, when I didn't know what to do, I took law in France because I had no particular ambition one way or another. But anything else, I mean, all the rest was developed in a very interesting way. FAO, and then when I had enough of FAO, I applied to WHO. Because I was more interested in medicine and health than in agriculture or fisheries. And I got landed in Brazzaville, so I discovered Africa, which was then colonial Africa. And later on, a bit of the Middle East with Alexandria in Egypt, where the regional office of WHO was then. And all along, I managed to write the studies for the doctorate in public law. Made me write, because I wrote my thesis on syndicalism in UN organizations. And then after that, I went from one subject to another. One friend of mine said, "Oh, Yves is writing a book every year," which I did at one stage, and one chapter a month. But eventually I slowed down, and now I'm definitely slowed down. But that helped me also along. And when in Geneva, I saw an advertisement from Webster University who just got started and asking for candidate professors. I applied, although I had no experience except in Bloomington, Indiana. I had taught French as part of my scholarship. But and they took me in. I thought the American universities are wonderful because they take people with or without diplomas, but based on their experience. And if they make it, they make it, and if they don't, they're fired. But that gave me a start, so I started teaching still when I was in WHO at appropriate timing. And then I went to the headquarters in St. Louis twice, and then I went to Boston University, short courses. I taught 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and then to Vancouver to UBC, University of British Columbia, which I enjoyed very much, was teaching. In Geneva itself, I didn't have only Webster University. There were other American universities who had summer courses there. And they took me in for some reason, and I enjoyed that very much. Keeps you in line with young people, and also when you teach, you can then write. Very often, it's what you teach on that gives you an interest in something else to write on.
Yes, Yves. We have a last question, and then we will close the great talk here. The last question comes from Geshe. She's asking if you ever experienced pressures from member states in your posts as a human resources manager or other decisions during your work within the UN agencies. And do you think it is easier or more difficult for young people today, young people joining the UN, to remain independent, as you just mentioned also, that independence is a key issue for the functioning of the UN?
Is it more difficult for young people joining the UN to be or remain? I think it's the same as ever. There's no change. I mean, the rules are the same. The engagement of when you are recruited is the same. You must respect the organization. You must not get the organization into trouble by being political or otherwise. So it is, there's no change there. You have to either accept or not, or fight against it. I have a very good friend who's been a whistleblower in HCR, and she was punished by HCR for many years. Eventually she fought, and after about 10 years of fighting, she got some recognition that the HCR had done wrong in her sense, because whistleblower sort of reveals what other staff members do, and in that case, and it's not not liked by the management, by the secretariat. But then I don't know if that answers the question. Probably doesn't, but get you.
Well, no, Geshe was also asking regarding your own pressures, those that you experience yourself in your human rights manager positions.
Oh, well,
Or human resources, sorry.
well, human rights management is under the Director General. I mean, it's directly connected with the top of the Secretariat. It doesn't have too much leeway. I mean, in my job, I could speak with the staff association delegates. I could speak to staff members who had trouble, who were threatened with dismissal, etc. I could have an individual role of trying to soothe things over or give advice on career, but on major political problems, no. We knew there were some scandalous situations at the time that, for instance, some high-level person in WHO or others were sort of aggressing women, and that was well before the Me Too thing, and everybody knew about it, and but nothing could be done because he was of a particular nationality, and the Director General would not have allowed any sanction. So that may have changed a bit in some ways in certain areas, such as this one, but on political questions, it's still extremely difficult for personnel or human resources to get action because of political consideration for the Director General who wants to be re-elected, unless he does like Mr. Putin and gets an eternal prolongation. That was a joke.
Yes.
There's some Director Generals who are stronger than others too. I mean, some during the McCarthy crisis were very courageous and faced the US, and they are exposed all the time. I mean, Director Generals receive questions and requests. Say, I want Joe Smith to be promoted to that job, so please do it. So either he does it or he doesn't. If he's strong enough, he can say, well, no, I have no power to do that. It depends on a commission, and then he can drown the situation. But Director Generals are very, very exposed to criticisms and pressures all the time from countries, from people. So it's not an easy, as I say, the UN Secretary General's job is one of the most impossible jobs on earth. But perhaps the present WHO Director General feeling is the same.
Indeed, Yves. Well, I think we do not have more specific questions, but of course we could spend, I don't know how many hours with you listening to your not only anecdotes, but also some thinking that goes beyond your own individual experience that can be extrapolated to the life of institutions and global order. So thank you so much, Yves. I will give the floor to Alejandro for some closing remarks. And thank you again to all of you to be with us at Great Talks.
Well, thank you very much, Manuela. Thank you very much, Yves. We spent more than an hour listening to you. And as Manuela mentioned, we would love to spend much more time. And you know, from time to time, I'm asked, why do you continue so active in Greycells? And I think this session is just an example of why. because having the chance to meet and be in contact with persons and professionals with such a rich life is really a privilege. Today, we had a meeting with the Director General of United Nations, and we mentioned in a way this, being in touch like people, like I say on the stream, Werner, Cecile, Manuela, Paul Bailey, Enrique Sierra, Geishe, Jan Erhard, Paul Rolian, David Dror, who are seniors and have such a rich life, but also getting in touch with the younger generation that comes really very, very strong, as Federica and all the students in China. This is really amazing. This is really a privilege. But I enjoy particularly the contact with you. I was just remembering seeing at the Diaporama that we started activities something like 5 or 6 years ago. And Yves is possibly one of the most active members in Greycells. I don't recall that in any time, in any occasion, he said no to anything. He took the bus, he took the plane, he took the train, and he came from Tonon or wherever he was. And now through the social media, he's completely in touch with us. And I have to recognize that we have abused him. This has been actually the month of Yves. I asked him one day, I think we all asked him one day if he could write something like 800 to 1,000 words about his story and to be published in the UN special review that's published here in Geneva. And he sent the 1,000 words the same day. So, oh my God, that's really very fast. And today also, we had the first emission of an interview to Yves Beigbeder in a new radio station that covers all the area of Geneva in between Switzerland and La Grande Genève, between Switzerland and France, Radio Tonor. It was again Yves who was the star. So apologies for abusing you, Yves, but it's really a privilege to having you with us. Thank you very much. We have audience today from China, USA, Spain, France, and of course Switzerland. And I don't know, iPad Laura, where are you from? But possibly from another country. And Susan, I don't know where you are. But thank you very much for joining us. Where are you? Can you activate?
I'm very grateful for Greycells for inviting me. I thought I was retired, but I understand I'm not.
You're absolutely not.
I was gone for a while.
Thank you very much, Susan. Where are you?
So I'm in Switzerland. Sorry, I had to go and get my food delivery. Anyway, just to add that I had the privilege of working a little bit with Yves when he was at WHO, and he was always a very respected individual, and he has been extremely helpful, especially on legal issues for the Association of Former WHO Staff. So, and one good thing about the COVID event is that we have meetings, they're held virtually like you are having this today, and it means that Yves can participate. So when he did make it once in person actually last year or earlier this year, I can't remember which, but anyway, so many thanks to Yves and bonne continuation.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Joseph. And also thank you very much to Salvador Gutierrez, who is joining us from New York. I know he speaks German. He's a passionate of history, world history, and he couldn't miss this session. He actually asked us to be a member of Greycells at large. And of course, we said yes. So we will be meeting frequently, and possibly you will be participant of one of our great talks to share your professional experience. Thank you very much, Salvador. And again, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yves, for this session. And looking forward to seeing you all in the future ones.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you, Yves. Thank you, Yves.
Bye, Yves.
Bye. Goodbye, everybody.
Bonne continuation.
Pleasure.
Take care.
Good, thank you.